Ali Flufla, say this is the Mirage 2000, the CS4, the event plane, the one that I wanted, the one that I got, and the one thing that is holding me back from applying to the content creator program because I have the thing that I want. So there's really no motivation for me to completely sell out and become a Gaijin shill. But speaking of shilling, we're going to be talking about money. We're going to be talking about the economy because by and large, the way that Sim works and the reason that Sim isn't popular anymore and is not going to continue to grow is more or less as Hillary's husband put it. It's the economy, stupid. And the sim economy over the past year or so has been kind of obliterated. And the way that we got here is rather interesting, but also rather predictable. Now, if you've played any of the game modes outside of AirRB, if you played Naval, if you played Sim, you will have noticed that by and large, there are gaps in the way that the economy has functioned or the way that it can function that is exploited by more or less like botters, people that are going to grind out an account to potentially resell it to like basically like people in China, internet cafes, stuff like that. It's a way to circumvent the pain and suffering that actually monetizes the game, but at the same time, the way that these people are doing it usually involves buying premium time, premium account, and some kind of premium plane and premium boat. Usually, what has happened in the past, from what I've noticed, is when the research points economy was good and the Silver Lions economy was bad, you would have accounts that had 4,000 or 5,000 games on, like the Moffat Destroyer, and they would run a bot program in Naval, and they would get a bunch of Silver Lions from that. And then they would take some kind of premium plane and take it into Air SB and basically run a bot script where it would more or less just do some kind of meaningless task like, oh, it goes and it bombs the airfield and then it goes to the runway and it spins for a couple of hours. Previously, the Silver Lions economy was also good and everything was like pretty good, and it was just based on activity percentage. And the way that that was circumvented is people would reach basically the bare minimum score that they needed to have 100% activity within a certain amount of time, and then they'd take the plane and go to the runway and trim the rudder to the left and throttle up a little bit, and they would spend the rest of the game just spinning on the runway. So it was basically a maximizing rewards for minimal risk, and a lot of sim players didn't like this, and rightfully so, because most of the games that you would go into trying to find the one or two games that were actually active with players was rather tedious. And the way that Gaijin responded to this was they implemented what they call useful actions, which means that more or less your activity time is limited to 15 minutes, and if you reach your set score within 15 minutes, you go out, do your 15 minutes of score, get your like 2 kills, your 1 kill, or 1 kill on a couple of ground targets, and then you RTB. And once you RTB, you get a 20% bonus to your earnings. On top of that, they basically took all of the earnings that you can get and reduced them to the point that you are no longer going to do any better than, say, for instance, the average ARB player. And I think if you actually do the math on it, and if you are about the same skill in both game modes, you will find that ARB is much better for as far as like time invested versus how much reward you get out of it. And this has really manifested itself for me in the fact that I might have to play AirRB again. I might actually have to play AirRB in order to afford the Silver Lions for like some of the new stuff that's going to come in the next update, because as a semi-proficient, halfway decent AirRB player, usually on the Feet Picks account, I was sitting on around 10 million Silver Lions at any one point. And then on my PlayStation account with no premium time but a lot more game time, I was sitting around 40 million SL. Both of these accounts at this point, after playing Sim for a year, have been more or less obliterated to the point that I'm in the same boat as everyone else is. I'm down to maybe less than a million SL, and it's really easy to get like a bad top tier game without premium time and just kind of obliterate your savings. On top of that, if you're going to end up buying some of the tech tree stuff, like as I grind France, as I try to get up to, say, the Mirage 4000, that grind is rather tedious. It's much easier for me to go back to AirRB and play some kind of premium plane, go in, get 2 kills, and usually within, let's call it 15 minutes or so, with a booster, I could make around 200 to 300,000 SL. I want to say that I don't have, I don't have like a spreadsheet of, oh yes, this is the time input versus output, but anyone that's played Sim realizes that the rewards are rather poor. There are some exceptions. There are some places where the matchmaker is okay. Playing things like the Chinese Key 84 is a relatively okay use of your time. It might bring it up to being on par with your AirRB earnings, but even then, I think that, in all honesty, I think you can just go to AirRB and earn more, or you can go to Naval and earn more. And what this actually means for Sim is it has an incredibly detrimental impact on the gameplay. It means that because people can't really afford to stick in games, it means that people are incentivized to quit and go find a new one. Quit and go find a lobby where they're not as threatened. And this means that the AirSB player base is a lot more distributed between a bunch of different lobbies than it needs to be. The other thing is that at your higher tiers, you can't really... a lot of guys can't afford to learn. The learning process itself is more expensive than just your kills to death. The learning process means that if you die too many times in a sim match, you have to go to some different game mode to recuperate your losses just to maybe be able to afford to play. And it's not like top tier gameplay is particularly hard to figure out. It's just that with the way that missiles work, with IRCCM, with missiles that you can't dodge from certain aspects, with like the realistic expectation of survival becomes a lot less likely in Sim, especially at top tier. It means that the game is almost effectively structured in a way that you are kind of more or less guaranteed to at best break even. Using top tier Sim as a means to actually stockpile SL, or using as a means to grind to the top of a tech tree, is the least efficient way to do it. And because of the fundamentally flawed economic system, it means that even beginning to focus on improving Sim gameplay is kind of a wasted effort. Like, there are tons of things that I would like to see be done with Sim. Things like adding more radar functionality, just improving the overall user interface, adding new planes, new maps, new anything, making the AI better. Just tons and tons of stuff that can be done differently to improve the game mode. And all of that is completely meaningless if you can't get a player base to show up and actually want to play the damn thing. Like, let's think about this in practical terms. I actually have the Steam chart pulled up right here, and if you look at February of 2020, on average there was around 35,000 people logged into the game just via Steam. If you fast forward that all the way to now, 4 years later, on average, you have just over 100,000. It seems to fluctuate between around 100,000 to 120,000. And of that percentage, basically you have exponential growth over 4 years of the player base, but you don't actually see any of this in Sim. The number of players that are playing Sim today is probably in reality about the same as it was last year, or even less. And I would argue that if you talk to people that played Sim in the past, they would argue that it's even less popular today, even by pure player count. The number of War Thunder players in the past 4 years has effectively tripled, and none of that growth is being realized in Sim. Just think about how ridiculous it is that this game has around 100,000 players online at any one time, and the fact that I can scroll through every single entire Sim lobby to find like 1 or 2 players that I specifically want to target. That is a realistic possibility just due to the fact that Sim is that unpopular. Like, if I want to play against Greek Air Force, I can really easily just go through all of the lobbies, all of the active Sim lobbies, and look at the player cards, and that's a process that takes maybe 5 minutes. On the other hand, if you're playing a BR that's not necessarily popular, you're going to end up playing against a lot of the same players over and over again. That's just a side effect of how unpopular and how stagnant the game is. And what this means is that effectively the useful actions economy is completely failing the simulator community. And usually I'm not someone to ascribe Gaijin with any kind of bias because I usually just kind of look at it as incompetence as opposed to bias. But in reality, the implementation of useful actions is it is malicious incompetence at this point, because sim players have made it known that we don't like this system. It's not very good. It's not healthy for the game mode. It's pretty obvious, especially if you look at growth numbers, especially if you look at the way that players end up experiencing the game, and all of the economy problems in sim could have very easily been solved with like a little bit of human effort, with a little bit of coding, because I can't imagine that it's too hard to flag all of the bot accounts that were exploiting the economy system beforehand, because they all have like very obvious indicators of what they're doing. Like if you go to an account and you see that he has a premium MiG 21 or whatever and he has no kills in it and 6,000 deaths, it's pretty obvious that that account is being used as a farming pinata. It's also too easy to go to the replays and look at the replays from the farming accounts and see exactly what they're doing, and even having some sort of manual verification before permanently banning these accounts really probably wouldn't take all that much effort. Gaijin has actually finally started to get around to banning some of these accounts. It's, you know, around 2 to 3 years, a little bit late and delayed, but they're finally doing it. But even then, it's rather disappointing to see that some of these accounts of players that were intentionally rigging lobbies only getting temporary bans and not permanent bans, when you have video evidence that they've been doing the same thing for over a year at this point. So what's the solution to our economic problem and our gameplay growth problem that kind of stems from that? I think it's rather simple. I mean, they just need to increase the amount of rewards you get over a given time, and they need to reduce or just completely remove the cap that you'll get on rewards, because it doesn't make any sense that a guy can go in and get 10 kills very quickly and get the same rewards as a guy who gets 2 kills and then goes and lands. The idea that the game needs to be centered around crossing a minimum threshold to maintain viability is rather ridiculous. It's rather stupid. It means that there's no incentive to stick around in games that are going poorly, and there's no incentive to really learn how to do better outside of just surviving for longer, because really the way to benefit in sim is to just die the least amount possible. This is why the people that usually defend the useful action system as it currently exists are usually like a couple of guys that are playing like 4v4s in bombers on Vietnam or something, basically in more or less empty lobbies. You'll never see these guys in full lobbies. You'll never see these guys in contested airspace, because the way that they fundamentally play the game and the way that they benefit from the system is based on not having any player interaction. They're basically playing a player versus player game as a player versus environment game. And although these defenders are more or less playing the game straight and playing the game kind of sort of as intended, at least within the rules limitations, if you join their lobby and you go kill them, they're going to leave that lobby and go find another more emptier lobby so they can continue on their grind. And this has kind of the effect of just skewing the sim economy to more or less higher standards. Basically, there's a lot of people that you're not interacting with that are attaining 100% viability, 100% of the potential benefits at any one time. And there's not necessarily an elegant solution around not getting people to try to circumvent the zero-sum nature of the economy. But that doesn't mean that the game can't be structured in a way that incentivizes people playing in fuller lobbies. Like, you could potentially structure the game so that your rewards are based on how many players are in the lobby, so that if you go into a full lobby that is contested and really just kind of brutal, that you could stand to make a lot of earnings a lot quicker in a riskier environment. Whereas if you go to a smaller lobby, maybe your rewards are capped. Maybe they are not as easy to get. Maybe there is some kind of way to make that possible, so that when you're fighting in these 16v16 lobbies, where going 1-1 is kind of like an above average play, where you can actually be recognized for that with some form of progress, or at least reducing the negative outcomes so that players that want to actually play the game are more likely to stick around and learn how to play it. Because the current economical structure strongly incentivizes players to leave games to go find better lobbies as soon as they start doing well. It means that at any one time, you might have a strong red team beating up on a weak blue team, and then have two other lobbies that have strong blue teams beating up on weak red teams. Now, would fixing the economy, making the economy better, solve all of Sim's issues? No, absolutely not. There's a lot of problems with the game mode. I don't necessarily think that fixing the economy is going to change exactly the way the game plays out, as far as like people don't like losing. Like, people don't enjoy doing badly at War Thunder. That is like a human reaction, and there's not really any way to really get around that right now, outside of either like trying to cultivate a better community or reward some sense of competition. But before you solve all of the gameplay issues, before you actually develop the gameplay, you have to structure the economy in a way that people actually want to like show the fuck up and fight. And right now we just don't have that, and I don't really see any solution on the horizon to that, because the developer's position has been that the average progress within Sim is on par with the other game modes. It means that, by and large, as far as they are concerned, the system as it exists is working as intended. Anyways, that's my TED Talk on the simulator economy, the problems with it, how it affects gameplay, and a little bit of the potential solutions. But in all honesty, I don't think we're going to get anything outside of incremental and small changes, and it means that we really shouldn't expect any growth within the simulator mode outside of purely community-driven efforts. And on that note, that is the end of the video. If you like talks like this, if you like the War Thunder Doomer channel, like and subscribe to it, leave a comment, all the standard YouTube stuff. And I will see you next time, hopefully with something a lot less bleak and depressing, but we shall see.